So the next series of lectures that we're going to do are going to be on auto rotations. I put some videos where I did some full down auto rotations in the R44. It's a series of about, I think, 5 parts to the video. And R22 also went out in the R22 and did some full down auto rotations in the R22, and I think it's either a 4 or 5 part video as well. And there's one video, each of those videos have been stitched together, so it's a relatively lengthy video, I think about 30 or 35 minutes for the R44 and about 25 minutes for the R22. But you're welcome to take a look at that. I recommend you actually take a look at those videos so you get an idea of what an auto rotation, especially full down auto rotation, looks like from within the aircraft. So let's talk about why you might want to do an auto rotation in the first place. Well, one reason you might want to do an auto rotation is if the engine quit. Right? That's a very good reason for doing an auto rotation. If you lose the power plant, whether it's a turbine or a gasoline engine, if you lose the engine, you have just a matter of a few seconds to get the collective down. In the case of the R22, it's a matter of only about 2 seconds to get the collective down. In the R44, you have a few more seconds than that, probably 4 to 5 seconds to get the collective full down before you'd actually get a blade stall. And there's some other things you can do to increase your the length of time you have to get the collective down. One is coming slightly aft on the stick during the entry of the auto rotation, and we'll talk more specifically here in just a minute about how you do the entry, the glide, the float, and the sit down, the flare, the float, and the sit down on the auto rotations. So again, engine loss would be a prime reason for wanting to get that collective down. And if you don't get the collective down in an adequate amount of time, you will get a blade stall and you will die. You're not going to get hurt bad. It's not going to scare you. You're going to die. A blade stall is a universal fatal event. Okay, so you have got, if you do nothing else right, you have got to get that collective down as quickly as you can if the engine quits. Right? But there's other reasons for wanting to do an auto rotation as well. How about if you're on fire? That would be a really good reason to do an auto rotation. An auto rotation is essentially the quickest way to get a helicopter on the ground. Okay, so if you have a fire in the engine compartment, let's give you an example. You're in the pattern here at the airport, and we're going around doing touch and goes or whatever. And the tower was to give you a call and say, "Hey, look, you got smoke rolling out of your engine compartment. Looks like looks like you're on fire." Then what would you like to do? Well, if you read the emergency procedures for pretty much any helicopter handbook, a lot of the emergencies are step number 1 is enter an auto rotation because you want to get that aircraft on the ground and get out of it as quickly as you can. So an engine compartment fire would again be a very good reason to enter an auto rotation. How about an electrical fire within the cabin? That's an even better reason to enter an auto rotation and get that thing on the ground. In fact, it's one of the areas where I kind of disagree with, if you read the emergency procedures in the Robinson helicopters, they say if you had an electrical fire in the cabin, number 1, turn off your master, turn off your alternator switch, open the cabin vents, and then enter the auto rotation. I think I'd probably enter the auto rotation, then turn off my master, turn off my alternator switch, open the cabin vents, because I want to get on the ground and out of that thing as quick as I can. Once I'm on the ground, I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to shut the aircraft down, time permitting. My head's not on fire or whatever. I'll pull the mixture and shut the engine down and turn off the fuel valve, and before I exit, time permitting, with either one of those cases. How about loss of the tail rotor? We're flying along 70, 80 miles an hour in the R44, 90, whatever, and we get this sudden right yaw that we can't counter. We hear a bang, and we get a sudden right yaw that we can't counter with any left pedal inputs, and like you just lost your tail rotor. Not a very common event, but it does happen. All right. So if you were to lose your tail rotor in forward flight, then you want to, if you've got a place to go, immediately in immediate vicinity, then go ahead and do an auto rotation. This is going to have to be a full down auto rotation. You don't want to let the power roll back up and do a power recovery. All right, this has got to be a full down. Right, so you'd want to enter an auto rotation. Let's say that for whatever reason you couldn't get and you didn't have a spot under, you're over woods or whatever, then they recommend that you actually keep your speed up. You know, in the R44, you want to keep it up to a good 70 knots or even a little bit faster, and get to a place, preferably an airport or a highway without a lot of cars on it or whatever, and put the thing on the ground. You know, enter an auto rotation and do a full down auto rotation. I prefer the airport. You know, you can get the thing back to the airport. At the airport, when you do the full down auto rotation, you've got resources available. There's, you know, fire and EMS. So it would definitely be your best option if you get back to the airport with loss of a tail rotor to do your full down auto rotation there. So, all right, so let's talk about what happens when you enter an auto rotation. So your engine quits. All right, there's different phases of the auto rotation. The first phase is called the entry. All right, and what the entry means is that you put the collective down. You've got to get the collective down, right? You got to get that collective down, and you have just a matter of a couple, 2 to 5 seconds in most helicopters to get the collective down. Once you enter the collective, once you lower the collective, a couple things happen when the engine quit and or you lower the collective for a practice auto rotation. First of which is that you're going to have a lot of less torque going to the rotor system, so you're going to get a left yaw. You know, this aircraft is going to want to suddenly yaw to the left as you lower the collective, or as the engine actually quits. If it's due to engine loss itself, you'll get the yaw at the time that the engine quits. And that has to be countered with a little bit of right pedal to keep the aircraft in trim, so that you're not flying through the air sideways like that. You want to keep the aircraft in trim during the auto rotation. So you've lowered your collective, and simultaneously you brought in some right pedal to counter the yaw. And then the third thing that needs to happen is you need just a slight aft check, just a little bit back on the stick, to maintain the aircraft in a relatively level attitude longitudinally. All right. If you guys remember, anytime you lower the collective on a helicopter, you decrease the amount of lift, and due to gyroscopic precession, then the nose is going to want to droop a little bit. The nose is going to want to come down. So you've got to bring a little bit of aft cyclic in there to counter the droop there. All right, so you've done your entry successful. Now you do what I like to call the glide. So you're trying to establish a speed of about 70 knots in the glide. Once you come down to about 40 feet, then you're going to initially start a bit of a wimpy flare, and then flare into it. Eventually you'll get to the amount of flare that it takes to level the aircraft off. And after that flare, that's the float. All right, so you flare, and then you're floating and floating and floating. Then about the time the aircraft is starting to settle, as rotor RPM decays and your speed is bleeding off, the aircraft's going to want to settle. That's the point where you're going to want to let go of the throttle, because you got the throttle rolled down, and then raise the collective slowly. You're going to raise this collective up, and then after a few seconds, when you're nearly at zero airspeed, then you're going to come forward and level the skids. And this is for a power recovery auto. The only real difference between a power recovery auto and a full down auto is at the end of the float, when you're settling, you're not going to roll the throttle back up. You're going to allow the aircraft to settle. You got to get the skids nice and level before you touch down. But essentially, that's the biggest differences between the power recovery and a full down auto.